Hello, everyone. This is Talk to the Author with Dr. Mamie Smith, and I'm Dr. Mamie Smith. We're coming to you live, worldwide, on the Dwayne Parham Show at Cats Radio, catsentertainment.com. We have another great show for you today. We will be talking with psychologist Ernie Vecchio about some of his books and the impact he has had on the lives of many people. But first, I'd like to say, Talk to the Author is sponsored by Educational Arts Society, Inc., and this is a nonprofit organization with a platform that is designed to reach out to authors like myself, who may not have a celebrity status, but believe that they have a message that the world needs to hear. We're just plain people, everyday people saying, you know, we tried this has worked for us, maybe it will work for you. Now, if you like the show and you want to keep it going, send a donation to easymusic.org. That's EASZMUSIC.org. No donation is too small or too large. Now we're going to bring on our guest. Hi, Ernie. How are you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Very well.
Okay, you sound like you're much further away. I don't know why. It's like you're not talking into the microphone or something, but I can hear you. It sounds like you're talking another end of the room.
Oh, well.
I can hear you.
Great. Well, you know, we're delighted to have you on the show and have you share that wealth of knowledge that you have. But, Ernie, I'd like to know a little bit about you, and I'm sure the audience would too. What part of the country are you now?
I am in West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia.
Oh.
So I'm in the Appalachian section of the country.
Okay. Is that where you grew up?
Yes, in fact it is.
Okay. Well, you know, we got a lot to talk about because you've got several books, and we're going to probably talk about 4 of them. But let me just ask you, if you were to define yourself in a couple of sentences, what would you say?
My stuff? You mean
yourself?
Yourself
person. Work. Yeah.
Okay, so if I was going to describe my stuff in that context,
okay.
I've been a helper for over 40 years, and so my stuff is the accumulation of the lessons and the wisdom that my patients have taught me, and what I have learned about the human condition. I mean, I tend to write about the human experience, and of course, when I began the profession, it was all about trying to find myself. But I will tell you that once I began working with thousands of different people, that it shifted to me beginning to just learn what it means to be human, period.
Sure. Now, what impact do you believe that you've had on the lives of your patients?
Well, being a doctor, you don't think about impact. It's kind of like at the end of the experience with the patient, you ask them what they think they got from the experience, and all I can say is I haven't had very many unhappy patients over the years. So
that's great.
I think my impact has been substantial, but I think the impact on me has been equally as substantial.
That's good.
What they gave me is probably much more than I gave them.
Oh, I don't know, but but you sound sort of like I'm a teacher, and so I learned from my students. Even though I'm sure I gave them some knowledge, but I learned so much from them, and I hear that's what you're saying, and I can certainly understand that.
Absolutely, yeah.
In talking about you, I found that you have, because I did quite a bit of research on you. I had to find out who's this guy. I found that you have groundbreaking insights about new wisdom on human suffering, and I just kind of like to know what that is. What is this human suffering, this wisdom that you're talking about?
Well, I think it's a couple things. It's the first part is that you already have enough in the human psyche that you can stop suffering today. You don't have to create any more adversity. You already have enough. And I will say, though, that is not true until you probably hit your early 30s. Because you're in the process of accumulating your pain and adversity in those earlier years. But so the first thing I would say is that you don't have to suffer anymore if you are, because you have enough already in reserve to basically convert and turn into something special. The other thing is that there is actually a way to suffer, and we're not really taught how to do that. There is an actual healthy way to suffer, and most people, their way of dealing with that is to not suffer.
Yeah.
I think the healthy way is to just try to avoid suffering. And in my estimate of it, there is no way to be in the human experience and avoid suffering. No way at all.
So here, if I hear you, you're saying that every individual has the capacity to get rid of suffering, but most of us just don't know that. Is that what you're saying?
It's not so much get rid of it, is convert it.
Convert it.
Because you're not going to get rid of the.
Okay.
Because what we're talking about here is passion.
Okay.
That the human experience is driven by passion, and passion is to suffer. That's what passion means, is suffering.
Okay.
And compassion means to suffer with. And so what we have been taught by the culture, unfortunately, is to suffer for ourselves and for others, rather than to suffer with ourselves and others. And that's a big distortion, and I learned that repeatedly. It was a common theme through all of the thousands of people that I've worked with.
And you make a clear distinction between suffering for and suffering with. So kind of tell us what that difference is.
Well, suffering for is victim. If you're suffering for yourself, then you are swimming in the victimization of your experience. If you're suffering for another human being, you're trying to carry that suffering for them, and you cannot do that. So you're victimizing yourself in the carrying of the suffering, and you're victimizing yourself in thinking that you are doing something wrong in that process of suffering. The idea is, I guess, if I can simplify that, is that we are taught there's a right and a wrong way to be who we are, and which is a kind of a moral approach to the problem. When there's an ethical way to be who we are, and the ethic of who we are involves the whole of who we are. So it's the context.
Sure. Okay.
And so that's what we lack, I think, in the culture. We're not actually given the context of how to suffer.
So if I wanted to suffer for myself, or how would I do that? The same way I would suffer for someone else or with someone else?
Yeah, if you're suffering for yourself, then you're doing that from the ego's perspective, and you are thinking there's a right and a wrong way to be in that suffering, and you're probably not being very kind and very gentle to yourself in the process. If you're suffering with yourself, you're actually staying with the pain, you're staying with the adversity, you're allowing it to run its course, and then something special happens as a result of it. It's the difference between an epiphany and a catharsis. An epiphany is an insight that is brought on by adversity, where a catharsis is an actual purging of who you thought you were to become who you really are. And that is the purpose. That's why, as human beings, we suffer. It's for us to purge these fake identities and these fake ideas of who we think we are.
Wow. Now, let's talk about your book. Well, one of them that we're going to talk about today, and this one is called Gifted Compassionate Therapy. How are you defining compassionate? And I know you've told us something of that. So if you could just, what makes it gifted?
I saw that you looked at both of those. The Gifted Compassionate Therapy book and the Preferential Assessment to Self-Care are not books. They are not books in the literal sense of the word. They are textbooks. They are written specifically for professional counselors and helpers. And so Gifted Compassionate Therapy is actually a theoretical, philosophical, spiritual model of how to approach the human condition. And the preferential self-care assessment is a tool that is used in that model. So those two books are specifically written. Yeah, those two books are specifically written for for graduate level students and for people that are training to be psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors and so forth.
Okay, so the everyday Joe Blow probably wouldn't understand if they bought.
No, it's not that they wouldn't understand. They probably wouldn't be as interested in those particular books unless they were in the professional helping field.
Got it.
But to define gifted compassionate, a gifted compassionate is an individual that is empathic. They have a close relationship with their suffering.
Oh.
And they are either awake or they are asleep with that gift. If they are, and many people that I've discovered, and so I actually have an instrument that measures whether or not you possess this gift and whether or not you are conscious of it. And of course, the process is to make you conscious if you're unconscious of this particular gift. And since you're a teacher, you'll get this. It's kind of like when you evaluate a child to see what their IQ is, and they show up gifted, which is 130 IQ. That sounds like good news to everybody, but to the child, it's an enormous amount of responsibility because now all of a sudden they have to be smart.
Sure.
And so a lot of times when we find out that our children are gifted with their IQs, the problem is their maturity is behind their intelligence. So at that point, they're not able to actualize their gift. And so it's the same thing with gifted compassion. You might have the gift of compassion, which means a close relationship with your own pain and a sensitivity to the world around you. You may not be conscious of how to use it or what to do with it. Many of the people that have this gift unknowingly pursue helping missions and then find out after the fact that they had the gift to begin with. So in other words, it was kind of by design they ended up becoming helpers.
Now, you say this book, you say in this book somewhere I read that it's a beyond ego guided approach to emotional problem solving. What does that mean?
It's beyond the personality. When you look at the human experience and you look at the study of psychology and psychiatry and counseling and the helping fields, they are predominantly looking at personality dynamics and personality dysfunction. And there is so much more to the human experience than just your personality or your ego. And so what I include is the three other components, which is the soul, the spirit, and the heart. Those four components combined make up what I call an internal GPS that is actually what you should be operating with as you are doing your life. Most people are only using one or two of those particular adaptions at any one given time. So the problem, as far as the culture is concerned, when you think the ego is all there is, then the ego ends up becoming the default compass. When in truth, the compass for the human experience is the heart.
Okay, so you're saying that lots of people, or many of us, use the ego more than we use the heart, the soul, and the spirit.
Absolutely, yes, and so too does the culture. Yeah, in fact, the culture promotes that. That's part of the reason why the culture is in so much pain and agony. When you pick up a newspaper and read the headlines, all that is about is ego dysfunction. All of the craziness that you see in the paper is ego dysfunction.
Now, I'm trying to get a handle on this and trying to clarify it also for my listeners. Now, are you saying that if I embraced or my listeners embraced the heart, soul, and the spirit, let's say I'm a person who is subject to flying off the handle at the least little bit, angry, whatever. And if I embrace this heart, soul, spirit, then that's going to help me make that anger disappear. Is that what you're saying? Can you give me an example? Or
I don't know if it'll make it go away. But what you're doing is you're moving from a subjective place. So in other words, when you're angry, you're very close to whatever it is that's making you angry. If I'll give your folks an example. If I said that you saw somebody drowning in 3 feet of water, but you could not throw them a rope and you could not reach in and pull them out of that water, but you could say something that would absolutely save their lives, what would you say? Now, I think I've already asked you this question off the air, so you know the answer. Do you know the answer to that question? What you would say?
No, I don't know. No. Tell me what I would say.
Okay. Well, most people, if they hear that question subjectively and they stay in their ego, they would say, swim harder, don't give up, you're doing great, keep trying. So that they're not hearing, they're too close to the problem, and they're hearing the word drowning, so they're caught up in the emotions of the experience. If they back up far enough away from the problem and become objective, they would say, stand up. It's only 3 feet deep. So emotional duress of any kind is the ego making up that it's in the deep end of the pool. So when you actually get into that objective place, you've moved out of your ego, you've gotten closer to a connection to the heart and to the body, for that matter. You've got out of the brain, got in your body, got present with the problem, and therefore have an objective view of it. So the soul's perspective is the observer or the witness perspective. And so when you get in the position of the soul and see what the soul sees the whole problem. And in that moment, the compass then lights up and says, stand up.
Okay.
And so you can take things like anger, depression, fear. It's the ego telling you are at the deep end of the pool.
Sure.
And in actuality, you're not.
Ernie, I would equate this to what I call higher levels of thought, moving from. Yes. That's what I would equate it with, and I can see what you're saying.
And so the word is consciousness. The word has become conscious of what the total problem is. And again, that's context. When you back far enough away from the word there that was drowning, you get far enough away from drowning, then you hear the rest of the problem, which was you're in 3 feet. It's 3 feet deep.
Right.
And then when you get back far enough and you're not caught up in the word drowning, which is the emotional word there, you then can become more conscious to the whole of what the problem is presented to you. And in this case, it's the shallow end of the pool. So it's a simple example, but it's actually a practice to be conscious and to be present with your emotions. And that literally is the intent with Gift of Compassion therapy.
Well, that's interesting because now I use the same concept, whether it's physical, whether it's mental. I kind of, let's say I had a case or I sliced my finger or something, and I've had an experience like that where I've actually sliced my finger, and then to actually get rid of the pain, I moved my thinking. I became very conscious of higher levels of thought. There is no pain. The pain, I'm looking at it, but, da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I moved my thought. And actually the pain disappeared. Does that happen with this therapy you're compassionate, this treatment that you're talking about?
It's what you're describing is more a thought process. But when you move to higher levels of thinking, you're moving from the left side of the brain to the right side of the brain.
Okay.
And so that's literally what's happening. I mean, you're getting into the right hemisphere of the brain, which sees the larger picture. And yes, of course, if you focus on pain, you're going to intensify it. If you distract yourself away from it, and so as long as that distraction is not a trick, because that won't work.
Right. Well, mine's not a trick.
Yeah. As long as you're not trying to trick the body into thinking that you're not in pain. That would work. But but it's actually deeper than that, of course, and it's a lot more. I won't say it's complex, but it is deeper than that. But the word that we're searching for here is mindfulness. Okay. Mindfulness. The mind includes both the head and the body. It isn't just the brain. So what Gifted Compassionate Therapy teaches people how to do is to be mindful. Okay. And mindful in and of itself is including the body in the equation, and when you do that, you are in a higher state of awareness, and you are present tense.
We're back. I'd like to say to my listeners, if you have a book that you would like to share, you can contact me at unfoldingofarose.ning.com. That's unfoldingofarose.ning.com. And this is Talk to the Author with Dr. Mimi Smith. And we're on the Dwayne Parham Show at Cats Radio, catsentertainment.com. And we're talking with Ernie Vecchio, a psychologist, and he's sharing some of his books and the knowledge of these books and how it can assist you in your experiences, particularly human suffering. Now, Ernie, you mentioned your preferential approach to self-care, and you told us a little bit about that. What is the message that you want your listeners to get if they're seeking help? What is the message that this book is offering? I know you touched on that. If you could just kind of spell it out a little bit more.
You mean on the preferential book?
Yes.
Or that particular book, like I said, is an assessment tool, and if they actually purchase that book, they would learn what their internal conflict style would be, and whether or not they had the gift of compassion that I've discussed before. And if they did not have the gift of compassion, what kind of shifts they would have to make internally to move them to an ethical place of self-care, which is a kinder, gentler place of how one treats themselves. What we discover in this whole business of compassion is that what we tend to be taught in the culture is to give it away and it'll come back tenfold, which means that we end up putting ourselves last on the list of compassion. We give it away to everybody else but ourselves. And so this particular book kind of shows you where you are in that process. And if you're off kilter a little bit, or if the conflict style that you have internally in terms of how you treat oneself is not so gentle, this book kind of gives you the guidance of how to move to a much more kinder and gentler place.
Now, you wrote another book. It's a novel. It's called The Astonishing Dream of Job. And, hey, those words going together, I was like, what does all that mean? What is The Astonishing Dream of Job? Tell us about
Job,
that.
Actually. It's Job from the book.
Oh,
from
Job,
the book,
not Job. I got it,
No,
Job. This is biblical.
No.
Okay. Now, that's why I didn't understand it. Okay. So The Astonishing Dream of Job. Okay, now I got it. So I get exactly where you're going with it, but maybe the audience doesn't. So would you expound on it?
Well, The Astonishing Dream of Job came out of my work with dream content with my patients as they were undergoing severe trauma. And the listeners need to understand that I'm not just talking about a divorce or losing your job. I'm talking about spinal cord paralysis, head injury, amputation. These were normal people one day and traumatized the next. And so what I discovered as I was working with these particular patients is that they all felt like they were being punished by God for the experience that they were going through. And so although I wasn't intending to challenge their belief systems, I kind of had to, because I was dealing with all different kinds of belief systems as they were coming back from their adversity. So I had Catholics and Baptists and Jews and Protestants and agnostics and all these different breeds of belief systems. And so I decided to take the Western culture's predominant story on the topic, which is the book of Job, and I took the approach that Job was having a dream. And so I took the entire 42 chapters and interpreted the entire book of Job as if he was dreaming. And so it ends up becoming an internal kind of process that he is going through. In fact, it is a step-by-step procedure of catharsis. The entire book of Job is a story of a man going through a cathartic experience. And a major crisis of faith, I might add. Yeah.
Sure. And it's interesting that you say that, because in my study as a scientist, we see that as a dream, just as you're saying, not a reality. That's the interpretation that my biblical intelligence tells me, that it is a dream. But I know there are many faiths that believe that this is a reality, just like, the crucifixion of Jesus, But I tend to not see it that way. And so that's good. So you took this story and you used it to in the idea that most of us as humans feel that suffering comes from not something that we say, something that we do, but from a higher power, if not, or God, for that, if you call it God, or energy, or light, or whatever the person calls it. And I tend not to share that philosophy, but or that biblical interpretation. But why do you think?
No, the story isn't that it comes from God. It's that we are alone in our suffering.
No. I'm not saying that you do. I'm saying that that's typical Christian belief. That's what I'm saying.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making. And I'm saying that you're saying, I understand, just the opposite. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that the human experience is that the adversity is built into the human experience, and when we are in our deepest, darkest despair, we feel the most alone in that moment. And what I discovered in working with my trauma patients is that they were all going through the exact same experience that Job was going through. They were having a crisis of faith. They were asking why, and they weren't getting any really good, valid answers. And so the story helped me kind of understand and to put into context what my patients had undergone, which is a cathartic awakening, which is why all the work I do is psychospiritual. In other words, you asked me at the beginning of the program, what did I mean by beyond ego? Well, it's beyond the psychology of who you are. I mean, you're so much more than just a psychological being. There's so much more to you. And so what I tend to write about and tend to try to teach is a psycho-spiritual understanding of the human experience, and including the spiritual dimensions, of which I'm calling soul and spirit. So the book of Job just really kind of affirmed, because I didn't go looking for this. It kind of just it kind of unfolded as I was looking at it. I didn't know what I was going to find, really, when I sit down to interpret the story, and it was actually quite profound. That literally every single one of my patients went through the exact same experience that Job went through, and that's about 10,000 people. So that's a pretty decent sample of the human condition, 10,000 people,
I should say. Now, this will lead us gracefully into another book that you have written, which is called The Soul Intent. And you told us what you meant by soul. Now, what I would like for myself, are you saying that soul, heart, and mind are synonymous, or are you making a difference between those three words?
No, I'm saying that they are symbiotic.
Okay.
That those four pieces of the human experience, soul, spirit, ego, and heart, have a symbiotic relationship, which means they are working in tandem. They're supposed to be working in tandem, not in opposition to one another. And so if they're working in tandem, you could not have a better internal GPS of how to live and do your life. And so what is happening instead is, because people are asleep to those other dimensions that I'm describing to you, those dimensions are in opposition to one another. So the soul shows us what we need to see. The human spirit provokes us into action. The ego adapts, and the heart shows the way. And so if those four pieces are working simultaneously in a symbiotic way, in tandem, then you could not be more present, you could not be more here, and you could not be more connected to what people would call the divine. So those four pieces are kind of working in unison when you are at your best self. But now I'm saying to you, though, that that's not the case for the majority of the population. The majority of the population is asleep to one or two of those dimensions at any one given time.
This is Dr. Mimi Smith on Talk to the Author on the Dwayne Parham Show at Cats Radio, catsentertainment.com. And we're talking with Ernie Vecchio, a psychologist, about the impact that he has had on the lives of thousands of people throughout the world. And so, Ernie, we talked about soul's intent, and so I want to ask you a question about what spiritual maturity is in connection with the soul, the heart, the ego, and the mind.
Spiritual maturity in that context would be that the individual is no longer doing self-deception, that they are fully taking responsibility for the ego and all of its shortcomings and its failings, and putting it in its proper place as far as it's adapting to the world around it. And but spiritual integrity and spiritual maturity are kind of one and the same. That the individual learns how not to do self-deception, and that doesn't sound like a big deal. But when you consider that the ego's function is to delude us and to get us to do self-deception, it's a very big deal.
Oh, I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
Because many of us tend to run away from the things. When I say run away, I mean mentally run away from the things that are unpleasant. And we sort of use it as a mechanism to get away from. And if I hear you correctly, you're saying that part of this, I'm going to call it healing process, is that you recognize, number one, where you are in the ego. I call it the human experience. You recognize where you are in that human experience. And then once you do that, and you can begin to figure out or listen to, I call it messages, that's going to take you in a higher level of thought and move you beyond it. Now, let me give you an example and ask you to respond to it, because I'm trying to help my listener figure out, here I am in this human experience, and I'm a thief. And I know that there is a higher level. I know that God didn't create me like that. Let me just put it that way. God didn't create me a thief, but I don't know why I keep stealing things. And so when I look at that way away, that higher level of thought, even though I'm not there, I know it's possible. But here I am in this human experience, breaking into people's homes. How do we move from that ego, that human experience is what I'm calling it, to this higher level of experience and stay there? Can you talk about that?
Well, if a person is robbing and stealing, then they're stuck in a survival mode of some sort, or they wouldn't be doing that.
Okay.
And so the first step is they'd have to realize that they can survive without stealing. Okay. That survival is not theft. But
okay.
But typically what happens is that to have those two thoughts simultaneously is really not the way it works. Personality disorder is the inability to see that higher dimension, the inability to connect with that higher dimension. So that individual is actually blind to the possibilities and thinks that they're stuck and doesn't have any options. So they're not going to have the simultaneous thought of, I know there's a higher power or a higher way of state of being than stealing. If they actually believe that, they'd be riding some proverbial fence.
Which is what a lot of people do.
Yeah, but they're not riding the fence between present and past tense. They're riding the fence of past versus past. That's not typically the way that works. But psychological disorder in and of itself is a form of blindness. And so it's difficult to talk about, it's like you're asking me, how do you make a blind person see? The only way you're going to make a blind person see is they have to first realize that there's so much more to them than just their vision.
Right.
And that they can see with something else other than their eyes.
Yes.
And so it's a total shift in perspective, and you're not going to have those two perspectives simultaneously. It's not typically the way it works. And so the short answer to the thievery question is that when the person hits rock bottom and they're sitting in a cell and they are looking at life imprisonment, if they don't change their behavior, they may wake up in that moment of adversity that there is another possibility.
Okay.
So those kind of people typically have to hit rock bottom. They have to have their back against the wall before they're going to broaden their perspective of another version of themselves. The reinvention of the self is not something that typically people walk into voluntarily.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Ernie, this has been a very enlightening experience for me, and I'm sure for the listening audience. You've covered so many wonderful points here that I'm going to take with me, and I hope that my audience will do the same thing. It's just been a delight having you on the show, and I hope you will think about visiting us again in the future. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And I can see the old clock on the wall is ticking away, so I'm going to have to say goodbye. And thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Mamie. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. This is Dr. Mamie Smith on Talk to the Author, and we're about to come to an end of this program, and I'm about to sign off, and I would say tune in again next Sunday and listen to us, and that's a wrap.